Hey everybody, it's Jason from the Texas Gun Vault, and once again I'm coming to you with another range report, or really a range report product review, because we're not going to be reviewing a firearm today, but rather an accessory. And that accessory, of course, is a suppressor or silencer, depending on which term you prefer to use. And the silencer that we're going to be taking to the range today and talking about is the B&T SRBS762Ti-DM. I know, that is a long name, but it tells us everything we need to know. SRBS stands for Slimline Reduced Back Pressure System. 762 tells us this is a 30 caliber suppressor, and by the way, it is their full-size one. TI means it is titanium, and this is a 3D printed suppressor, and DM stands for direct mount. Honestly, I know it's a long name, but I kind of prefer companies that name their silencers like this instead of those cutesy names like other companies do, because you know exactly what you're getting right out of the box. So I'm really excited to get this to the range and find out how it works. Now, there is a couple of caveats to this video. The first one is this was sent to me for review from B&T. So I did not pay for this suppressor. However, I did pay for the NFA tax to transfer it into my name. So I always want to be open and honest with all of you guys so you know that I am fair and unbiased. Or at least you know I'm telling you the truth when it comes to how I feel about the products, because I don't want to hide anything from you. The other caveat is I review suppressors a little bit different than many other reviewers, because first of all, I don't have a decibel meter. And for some reason, all of the other reviewers seem to only care about this metric. And I argue that as a civilian, there are other things about a suppressor that we should take into consideration. Things like tone. Now, this is also a low pressure can. So what is the resistance like? I also want to test its heat resiliency or its heat dissipation, and of course test to see if it has a big point of impact shift or any ballistic changes when it's on the host weapons. This is a 30 caliber can, so I'm going to test this with 300 Blackout, both super and subsonic, as well as 5.56. So I want to talk about all of the specs of this silencer, and I want to give you some close-ups. So let me go ahead and adjust the camera, and let's talk about what this suppressor is all about. So let's go ahead and get some close-up looks at the B&T SRBS762Ti-DM and talk about its specs. This is B&T's full-size 30 caliber 3D printed titanium suppressor. It is rated for calibers as high as 300 Winchester Magnum. So B&T is pretty confident this is going to be a durable suppressor. It utilizes the Slimline Reduced Back Pressure System. You can see the end cap here. We have the vents around the side, which is pretty typical for a reduced back pressure suppressor. It is meant to have all of the gases come out the front instead of coming through the back towards the action of the gun. These suppressors are primarily designed for SBRs and AR-15s and AK-47s. It utilizes an easily adaptable mounting system. It does come with a direct thread mount, which you can take off and put on one of the B&T hub mounts, which there's various ones for different calibers and flash hider designs. This one is for 5.56 and the B&T flash hider. And when I go to the range and run this on a 5.56 rifle, this is the mount that I will use. And there is the B&T flash hider. It simply goes over it. It will lock into place when it finds that slot. There it is. And you just rotate the mount, and now it is on there solid. I'm very impressed with that. It looks great, and it's very easy to get on and off. So now let's go over the specs of this suppressor. It is 7.38 inches long. It is 1.73 inches wide. It weighs 9.9 ounces with the mount, which is really light. And that's something that really surprised me when I picked this up for the first time. And that's because this is made of titanium, which is one of my favorite materials for a suppressor to be made out of, because it seems to dissipate the heat pretty quickly, but it's light and very durable. It also has a black Cerakote finish. The suppressor is full auto rated and has no barrel length restrictions on any caliber. And I think that is pretty darn impressive. So the first test we're going to do as we go to the range is the tone test. And we're going to start off with the direct thread mount on a 300 Blackout SBR. And the things that I want to test here is the overall pitch of the suppressor. I know that for the most part, people only care about the decibel reduction, but if a suppressor has a lower pitch, it can actually be a little bit louder, but sound better to your ears. Now, being that I'll be testing this at an indoor range, I will still be using hearing protection, but I can tell the tone. I know this is kind of a qualitative test, but I have shot enough suppressors to know which ones sound better. So we're going to do all of these tests first on 300 Blackout, both super and subsonic. So let's go to the range and see what this suppressor sounds like. And starting off these tests with supersonic ammunition, I have to say I am quite impressed with this suppressor's pitch, tone, and performance. But before we talk more about that, there are a few people that I do need to thank and give a huge shout out to. First are the people from B&T. They're an amazing company, and I have always been kind of a B&T fanboy. And my channel is very small, and I am not a charismatic or flashy presenter. So for them to reach out to me and send this to my channel for review is honestly kind of humbling. So thank you so much, B&T, for giving me this opportunity. I also want to give a huge shout out to an amazing grip company that is my primary channel sponsor because they provide all of the ammunition for these range reports and product reviews. This company is owned by an amazing artist and craftsman named Mark, and of course the company is Brownworks. And Brownworks is a grip company making grips for guns like 1911s, CZ75s, Beretta 92s, and Browning High Powers, just to name a few. Pretty much anything you can imagine he can create, and every set of grips is made to order and your specifications. So I am going to put a link to his website in the comment section below, as well as a coupon code for 10% off your first order. As always, I ask you guys to go over there and check out everything he has to offer. And when you place an order for a set of custom Brownworks grips, please tell Mark the Texas Gun Vault sent you. So now let's talk about what this suppressor sounds like. I have to say that in my personal experience, when it comes to these flow-through baffle designs, typically they have a higher pitch than traditionally baffled suppressors. But this one has more of a mid-range or lower pitch. I was very impressed by that. And even though I was wearing hearing protection and I was at an indoor range, I could pretty much tell this is going to be a hearing-safe suppressor with 300 Blackout, and I did not expect that to be any different. It doesn't have any first round pop, but I did notice that I was getting a lot of sparks and unspent powder coming out the front of the suppressor, especially on that first round. So what's causing that? I'm not 100% sure. I didn't experience any of that when the gun was unsuppressed, but it wasn't really a big deal, and after 1 or 2 shots, all of that went away. So now the next test I want to do is do the same thing with subsonic ammunition. Of course, I'm expecting the result is to have this gun sound even quieter, but there's a little bit of a caveat with this test. When it comes to this 300 Blackout SBR, often subsonic ammunition does not run reliably, so I might have to manually cycle the action. But this review is not about the gun, it's about the suppressor and what it sounds like. So let's go back to the range, run some subs through this, and see if we get the same performance. And it looks like even with the subsonic ammunition being low pressure, I'm still getting quite a few sparks and a lot of unspent powder coming out the front of the suppressor on the first round. But like before, it dissipates after 2 or 3 rounds. So it doesn't give me that first round pop, but we do get that flash. Now, this is the quietest I think this rifle has ever been, and I have reviewed a few other 30 caliber suppressors in the past. This one, hands down, is definitely the quietest. I also know this test was not about its overall weight, but as it is attached to this little SBR, honestly, it is extremely light and makes the gun very well balanced. I'm very impressed with that, especially for its overall size. But the overall tone of this suppressor with subsonic ammunition is honestly quite amazing. The only issue is that unspent powder on the first round. Now, there's something else I want to take note of. As you noted, when I put the suppressor on towards the end of the rounds that I was shooting, the gun began to cycle, which means we are getting a little bit of back pressure, and sometimes that can be good. Sometimes these low resistance cans can be great because you don't get a lot of gas back in your face, but sometimes, depending on the gun you're running, you might need a little bit of that resistance for the gun to run more reliably. So it really depends on the application and your needs if this is the setup for you. But speaking of testing this suppressor's flow-through technology, I want to now run a magazine through it in pretty quick succession using supersonic ammunition because subs are not going to run reliably in this, and I just want to give you my opinion on how much gas is coming back through the action. And I know this is kind of a qualitative test because there's really no way of measuring this, but I have shot a lot of suppressors on guns like an AR-15 that use a direct gas impingement system to know which ones work better and which ones don't. Because if you have a lot of gas coming through that ejection port, your eyes kind of water a little bit, you feel it on your face. So let's go back to the range, let's put some rounds through this, and I'm just going to tell you what I'm experiencing if I'm shooting this gun a little bit faster when it comes to the back pressure and the gases coming out of the ejection port, and share with you my experiences. And I wish there was some way for me to quantitatively measure this and you not have to take my word for it, but it's all that I can do is just tell you that this honestly is one of the best suppressors I've ever shot and reviewed when it comes to this flow-through technology or the low resistance technology and baffle design, because I'm not getting much gas at all coming back through the ejection port. Honestly, it kind of feels and smells like I'm shooting unsuppressed. I don't feel anything in my face, and I don't feel and smell that unburnt powder. It's quite impressive, and I've shot quite a few of the suppressors with this type of baffle design from other companies like Huxworks, but none have performed like this. And if you couple that with its light weight, its size, and its overall tone, this is really turning out to be one awesome suppressor, especially for civilian applications. Now, the next test I want to do is go back to the range and I want to check and see if this suppressor changes anything about the ballistics and the point of impact. Now, I'm only going to test this at 25 yards, and yes, this rifle can go out way further than that, but this is the only range I have access to test this with. But if there is any point of impact shift, you guys can extrapolate that out to further distances. But I'm also going to get out the Garmin Zero chronograph and see if the projectile's velocity changes any as it passes through this suppressor. So we're going to test this with both super and subsonic ammunition and see what we discover. $17.21. $16.94. $17.18. $16.83. $17.13. $17.14. $17.11. $17.28. $17.03. $16.88. $9.32. $9.01. $900. $941. 923. $887. 903. 908. 907. 898. And so what did we discover? Well, as you know, every time you attach a suppressor to a firearm, it could change something. Sometimes that change could be for the better, sometimes it could be for the worse. So if you have a firearm that is grouping really, really well, sometimes if you attach a suppressor, that group is going to change. It could open up, but sometimes it's going to make the group even tighter. And there's not always a rhyme or reason to what changes about the gun. So in this case, what did we discover? Well, when it came to supersonic ammunition, I was actually really impressed because there were no changes. The standard deviation and the spread ballistically were almost identical, and the point of impact was pretty much unchanged. But when it came to subsonic ammunition, we had a huge improvement. As you hopefully saw, the standard deviation and the spread narrowed considerably, almost by half, and that's pretty darn good. You'll also notice, though, that the groups were about the same. So all of the changes that were affected by adding the suppressor to this gun were improvements with subsonic ammunition, and it had no changes to supersonic ammunition. I actually think that is a fantastic result. And as I have reviewed more and more suppressors, I can tell you that often the ballistics do change a lot. And so when you get a suppressor where you don't have this change at all, that means it is well designed. And I'm very impressed by these results. And so now the next test I want to do, and actually the last test when it comes to 300 Blackout, is what I call the heat resiliency and dissipation test. And a lot of people, I don't think about this aspect of suppressors, especially on the civilian side of things. When it comes to a suppressor, usually the biggest destructor internally is heat. If you get these things really hot, you're going to see a lot of corrosion. But also there's a safety factor. If you're out in the field, you're hunting or you're shooting a bunch, you have a gun like this on a sling, you put it on your back, well, you could accidentally burn yourself. And so I say when it comes to a suppressor, you want to know how it's going to handle heat. And with my personal experience reviewing suppressors, I have discovered that many of the suppressors with the flow-through baffles, because there's more surface area inside, typically they retain heat. But there's also certain build materials that these can be made of that actually dissipate the heat quickly. And titanium is one of those, and that's why titanium is used in the aerospace industry. So I just want to do a couple of mag dumps through this thing. I want to see how hot this suppressor gets with 300 Blackout. Then I'm going to wait 5 minutes and see if it's cooled down at all and what the temperature is, so we can see how this silencer handles heat. And pretty much we got the results that I was expecting to see. In the moment, the can did get pretty hot, but it dissipated that heat really quickly because of the titanium. It's such a great material for a civilian suppressor. Now, if you were going to run this on a machine gun or use it in harsh conditions often, I might recommend going with the Inconel version over the titanium, but you would lose those weight savings, even though this is full auto rated. Now, I have to say that because this can gets cool so fast, I think it's actually a very safe can from this perspective of civilian use. You can use it a lot, you don't have to wait very long, you can put this rifle over your shoulder again and not worry about burning your shoulder or your leg. I think that's great. Not all suppressors can do that. You have to wait quite a long time. So I also think in the long run, you're going to see limited erosion inside of the baffles. It just handles heat great. And so now I want to do all of these tests again, but on an AR-15 chambered in 5.56. Because many times when you buy a suppressor like this, you want to be able to go between different weapon types. And even though this is a 30 caliber suppressor, you can run it on an AR-15. But now you're probably asking, how's it going to work? Obviously, this AR is a 22 caliber firearm. This is a 30 caliber can. So how's that going to affect the flow through baffles? How's it going to affect the suppression? Well, that's what we're here to test. So we're going to do all of these tests again, but now on an AR-15. So let's go back to the range and see what this can sounds like on a 5.56 rifle, and if its tone is still as good as it was with 300 Blackout. And so how does the B&T suppressor handle 5.56? Well, overall, it continues to have a great tone. And I think that's because the internal volume of this suppressor is so large. Normally, when it comes to a 30 caliber suppressor, you do lose a little bit of its suppression with 5.56 because you have so much gas escaping out of the end cap. It still works, it still reduces the overall decibels, but this is working absolutely fantastic. I really feel like it's capturing a lot of that gas, a lot of that sound. It's still probably not as quiet as a dedicated 5.56 suppressor, but it still is working really, really good. We're also getting a few sparks and unspent powder coming out the front of the can, just like we experienced on 300 Blackout, but it's nowhere near as much. I'm very impressed with its tone. It's a low pitch and it's suppressing really, really well. And so now the next test I want to do, like before, is to check and see how much gas is coming back through the firearm and through the ejection port. So we're going to put a magazine through this in pretty rapid succession, and I'll just tell you what I'm experiencing behind the gun. And those results honestly kind of surprised me a little bit because I wasn't thinking I was going to experience much gas at all from behind the gun, but I actually did. Now, it's nowhere near as much as a traditionally baffled suppressor, but it's way more than I experienced on 300 Blackout with this silencer. So what's causing that? I'm not sure. 5.56 is a higher pressure cartridge, but I was thinking with that flow-through baffle technology and the fact that it's a 22 projectile going through a 30 caliber suppressor, I really didn't think it would build up that much pressure in the back of the gun. Now, as I said, it's nowhere near as much as a traditionally baffled suppressor, but it was way more noticeable than when I was shooting 300 Blackout through it. It's still, though, a very pleasant shooting experience. And so now the next test I'm going to do, of course, is to see if this can changes the ballistics or the point of impact with this rifle. So let's go back to the range and see if 5.56 is affected in any way by the suppressor. .30-51. 30-19. 30-23. 30-30. 30-69. 30-76. 30-41. 30-45. 30-31. 30-33. And it appears that just like 300 Blackout Supersonic, 5.56 is pretty much unchanged when it comes to this suppressor. Both unsuppressed and suppressed, the standard deviation and the spread seems to be the same, and the group on target seems to be about the same as well. So this is a very consistent shooting suppressor. I am very impressed with that. And so if you have an application where you plan on shooting suppressed and unsuppressed and don't want to have to change things like the zero on your optic, this might be the way to go. So for somebody like me, this is an outstanding option for the type of shooting that I normally do at the range. So now the last test, of course, I want to do is the heat resiliency test, or the heat dissipation test. Now with 5.56, I'm expecting this can to get even hotter, but that's going to be an interesting thing to see if it cools off just as much as it did with 300 Blackout. So let's go back to the range and see how hot this suppressor gets with 5.56. And I think that's pretty darn impressive. In just 5 or 6 minutes, we went from about 400 degrees down to about 130 or 140 degrees. this suppressor cools off really fast. And for the same reasons that I mentioned when I was reviewing this in 300 Blackout, I think this is a great suppressor for field use or for hunting, especially if you're going to be lugging this around with a sling and you need that suppressor to cool off relatively quick. I also think in the long run, this is going to be a very durable suppressor. So I think we've run this can through its paces. So the next thing I want to do is take it off this gun. I want to get some more close-ups of it, see if we can find any baffle erosion or any damage to the suppressor that would be concerning. But I also want to share with you something I discovered about this QD mount, and then we're going to try to clean this because as a civilian, well, we can't get suppressors as easy as police departments or militaries. And so a lot of times these are going to be kind of lifetime investments, and you want them to last as long as possible. Now, for the most part, when it comes to rifle suppressors, you don't have to clean them at all. Normally, just running the cans blows out all of the gunk and the debris. But some of us are a little bit OCD, so I do want to run this through a sonic cleaner and see if it cleans up nice. So let's go ahead and adjust the camera and let's see what the suppressor looks up close after being run at the range. And so now that we have this back from the range, let's inspect it for any premature wear on the baffles and also talk about the one issue I did have with the QD mount. So at the range, after that last test you saw, I tried to take this off of the flash hider. I simply rotated that nut on the back of the mount, like you should, to loosen it up. And then when I tried to remove the suppressor off the flash hider, it wouldn't come off, but it would rotate around the flash hider. And what I discovered is this little detent right here, which prevents the mount from going too far or the cap from going too far, had actually been depressed a little bit and allowed the cap to over rotate. And I can kind of duplicate this issue by pushing down on that detent, which allows that cap to move just a little bit further. And I'm pretty sure that is actually how you remove this for cleaning, but it had gone too far and I had not noticed that, and simply it would not remove from the flash hider. Luckily, I was able to figure that out by removing this, getting the suppressor off the gun, taking a look at the mount, and then I realized I could reattach it simply by screwing it down. It will only go so far until it locks into place. Then you push that detent back down, it will go a little bit further, and now it's locked on like it's supposed to be. But that was really the only issue that I had. The cap just over-rotated just a little bit. But obviously that is an easy fix, but it really is supposed to do that, allowing you to take that off for cleaning. So I really don't think it's a big issue. It's just what happened to me at the range. So now let's take this mount off the suppressor and let's look down at these baffles and see if we have any erosion or any issues internally that might concern us. And hopefully the camera's going to pick up on this. It looks pretty darn clean. I don't see any erosion at all. So I think we have no issues, and this is going to be a pretty darn durable can. This is another reason why I love titanium. It is very corrosion resistant and can handle all that blast in the blast chamber. Yeah, so no issues, no concerns whatsoever. So now let me go ahead and get out the sonic cleaner and let's see if we can safely clean this suppressor and get all of the gunk out of there so this suppressor would last a lifetime. And this next step might be a little bit unnecessary for some, but I want to know if this suppressor is ultrasonic cleaner safe. It is made of titanium, and in general, titanium and stainless steel is perfectly fine for these ultrasonic cleaners. You do want to avoid putting anything aluminum in them, and that's why I am going to hand clean this QD mount, because I'm not sure if there's any aluminum on it. But I do know that the direct thread mount is definitely made of steel, and the suppressor is made of all titanium. So we should be perfectly fine. So I'm going to go ahead and put it into the ultrasonic cleaner. I will tip that suppressor up just a little bit to make sure I get as much fluid in there as possible, and I think we're going to be just fine. I did put some gun parts cleaner in that water as well. So hopefully this is going to clean this suppressor up and make it look like new. So I'll see you in 30 minutes. And it looks like we are done. So let's take this out of here and see what the end result is. Hopefully the suppressor's in one piece. It still has its finish on it and it hasn't corroded away. So getting the basket out of here, let's wipe it down. Everything so far looks pretty good. Looks like the finish is still on it. Looks like just as it did as I put it into the cleaner. Let me go ahead and wipe out the inside here. It's going to have a little bit of fluid in there, but otherwise it's looking pretty good. So let's wipe down these parts. Let me double check it. Let's put it back together and make sure it has cleaned up like it should. So after washing this out, drying it out, I don't see any issues with the finish. Internally, it's definitely clean again. This is a user serviceable can from the aspect that you can put it into an ultrasonic cleaner if that is something that you care about. Now, as I mentioned, most likely you would never have to do that, but I do know there are fellow OCD people like myself that just like to have all of their guns and suppressors clean. So if you just feel the need to put this into an ultrasonic cleaner, I think you would be perfectly safe and fine doing so. So we have run this suppressor in a number of tests. We have taken it apart, we have cleaned it. I think we've learned a lot about it. So now let me readjust the camera and I'll give you my final thoughts. So what are my final thoughts on the B&T SRBS762Ti-DM? Well, this is a very impressive silencer. I love all of its specs. I love its construction. It's really a state-of-the-art suppressor. You can mount it on so many different guns. It's rated for very powerful calibers. Its overall tone is very nice, especially on 300 Blackout, and it suppresses 5.56 pretty darn well. It's extremely light because it's made of titanium. That's honestly the thing about the suppressor that I love. Its volume, but its weight. It's so light. It seems to be very durable. It dissipates heat very quickly. I experienced almost no point of impact shift or change in the ballistics, and the flow-through baffle design that this suppressor has definitely works. And I've shot quite a few suppressors that have baffle designs like this, and this is honestly, I think, the nicest, especially on 300 Blackout. So, on my star system, how would I rate the B&T SRBS762Ti-DM? Well, I'm going to give this 5 out of 5 stars. This has been an incredible review. And I know this has been a very long video, but I was very appreciative of B&T sending me this to try out. So I wanted to put it through its paces and try it on everything that I could. And this has not disappointed me. An outstanding product. So if you're in the market for a suppressor, I'd look at B&T. These new 3D printed suppressors are really amazing. So let me know what you think in the comments section below. Do you love B&T as much as I do? Do you shoot suppressed often? And what do you think of 3D printed silencers? Are they the wave of the future? So, as always, thanks for watching.